The sun was a cruel overseer that afternoon, hanging heavy in a whitewashed sky that offered no shade, no mercy. Heat shimmered off the dirt street like a fever dream. Dust clung to the boots of men gathered in a ragged half-circle before the fur. Wooden platform where lives were measured not by blood or breath, but by the clang of coins. The auction block stood tall, rough pine planks bleached by sun and stained by sweat, as if it had soaked up decades of shame. A hawk circled above, its cry sharp as a blade, then vanished into the wide emptiness of the sky. The girls were lined up like cattle for sale, wrists bound, eyes hollow. Some wept quietly, others stared at the ground, beaten before any man laid claim to them. The air stank of whiskey, unwashed bodies, and hot iron. But among the trembling forms was one who did not bow her head. Her hair, dark and tangled by wind, lashed against her cheeks like wild horse mane. Her wrists bore rope burns, raw and angry, yet she did not fidget or flinch. Her eyes, black, fierce, untamed, burned against the crowd as if daring them to try. She was no broken bird. She was storm-caged in human flesh. The auctioneer, a thick man with sweat dripping down his neck, slapped his ledger and barked, "Too wild for any man's hand. Mark my words, she'll tear the flesh off whoever tries." The men laughed, rough and mean, spitting tobacco into the dirt, yet none stepped forward. At the edge of the crowd stood a gaunt figure, hat pulled low against the glare. His shoulders stooped, not from age, but from burdens carried too long. His clothes hung loose, patched and faded, and the dust on his boots was the dust of a ranch that hadn't thrived in years. His name whispered through town as Silas Cole, the rancher too proud to beg, too tired to fight, too stubborn to quit. Debt gnawed at him. Loneliness hollowed him. Nights on his ranch echoed with nothing but creaking boards and his own weary breath. He had no business being here. He told himself that as he tied his horse outside the saloon, as he drifted toward the square pulled by some invisible current. But when his eyes met hers, the girl branded too wild. Something in his chest shifted. It wasn't pity. It wasn't desire. It was recognition. A fire, raw and unbroken, answering the ashes inside him. The auctioneer barked again, irritation creeping into his tone. "Who'll take the savage? Who dares?" The crowd murmured, but no hand rose. Silas's fingers twitched at his side. He heard the laughter, the whispers. Worthless, cursed, death to any fool who tries. He thought of his ranch, the fences falling, the cattle gone lean. He thought of nights when silence pressed down so hard it felt like a coffin lid. And before sense could stop him. His hand rose. The crowd went still. Dust hung in the air, like suspended breath. The auctioneer blinked, then grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Sold!" The hammer cracked against wood like a gunshot. A ripple moved through. The men gasps, low curses, laughter sharp with disbelief. "Cole's lost his damn mind," someone spat. "She'll gut him before the week's out," muttered another. But Silas did not flinch. He stepped forward, coins clinking dully as he paid. The girl was unbound, though the ropes left angry red bracelets around her skin. She did not weep. She did not speak. She only looked at him with that same fierce gaze, unbroken, unreadable. He turned, leading her away through the crowd. Boots shuffled back to give them passage, eyes following like wolves trailing prey. Whispers curled behind them like smoke. She'll be the death of him. The street stretched ahead, long and empty under the burning sky. His horse shifted, uneasy, as he helped her mount. She refused his hand, climbing on with a fluid strength that made the murmurs grow louder. Silas swung up beside her, jaw clenched, hat shadowing his face. He didn't look back. The town fell behind them in a haze of dust, laughter and whispers fading into distance. Ahead lay his ranch, broken and barren. Ahead lay a storm neither of them yet understood. Her silence was louder than screams. His choice was heavier than chains, and though neither spoke, the air between them carried the weight of a story already set in motion. Two souls bound not by mercy, but by fire. The horizon swallowed them, the hawk circling once more before disappearing into the dying light. The ranch rose out of the plain like a wounded animal, ribs showing, skin scarred. The fences leaned in crooked lines, some held by nothing but rusted wire and stubborn nails. The barn sagged under its own weight, the red paint long gone to gray. A wind moved across the land, dry and bitter, carrying with it the smell of dust and silence. Cattle wandered thin in the distance, ribs visible, their low calls hollow against the emptiness. The well creaked when the bucket came up, water sloshing weak and shallow. This was no place for pride. This was survival on the edge of nothing. Silas dismounted in silence, his boots sinking into the parched dirt. He let her down, but she pulled away from his touch, as if his fingers were iron shackles. Her bare feet hit the ground, kicking up. Dust. And she stood straight, shoulders back, eyes lit with a storm that refused to break. She looked at the broken house, the leaning barn, then spat into the earth. Not a word, just that. Silas's jaw tightened. He did not strike her. Did not shout. He simply walked on, shoulders hunched, leading his horse into the corral. She followed at her own pace, head high, as though she were stepping into a battlefield, not a prison. Night fell heavy. Coyotes sang in the far hills, their cries long and mournful. Inside the cabin, silence sat heavier than the shadows. The fire crackled low, throwing light across rough boards and the two figures sitting apart. He ate with slow, deliberate movements. She did not touch the food he set before her. Her eyes burned across the flames, defiance sharp as broken glass. Hours passed in the weight of that silence, broken only by the pop of firewood and her steady, sharp breaths. The second night was the same, the third too. On the fourth, hunger bent her pride. She snatched the bread from the table like a starving wolf, tore into it with teeth and trembling hands. Crumbs scattered, breath harsh in the quiet. Silas said nothing. He watched, face carved from stone. His eyes betrayed neither victory nor pity, only a weary acceptance. The loneliness grew into a presence of its own, invisible yet suffocating. It sat between them, across from them, even above them, settling like dust on everything they touched. Days bled into each other. Silas worked the fences until rope burns split his palms. He carried water until his back screamed. He fought the land, fought the failing cattle, fought against time itself. Sweat burned his eyes, blood darkened his knuckles. Still, he did not stop. She watched. At first, from a distance, arms crossed, mouth curled in contempt. Then, slowly, her eyes began to linger. When he stumbled under the sun, she frowned despite herself. When he cursed low at a broken fence post, her fingers twitched as if to move, but she stayed rooted. One evening, when the sky burned purple and gold, he did not return at dusk. The horizon swallowed him longer than it should. When he finally staggered into the yard, his shirt torn, his body dragging, he dropped the bucket and sank to his knees. His chest heaved, breath ragged. For a long moment she stood in the doorway, rigid as stone. Her jaw clenched, eyes narrowed, war raging inside her. Then, slow as reluctant rain, she stepped forward. She knelt beside him. Her hands, rough and calloused, brushed his arm. He flinched, then stilled. She pressed a torn cloth against the raw skin of his palm, binding it with awkward care. Her breath hitched, too close, too human. But she did not stop. Silas said nothing. His eyes lifted once, meeting hers. Something unspoken passed between them, fragile as glass. Not surrender, not forgiveness, just recognition that even storms had limits, and even fire burned softer at times. When she finished, she pulled away as if burned. Her gaze darted to the ground. Silence settled again, heavy but changed. Later, as he lay half asleep by the fire, she sat in shadow. Her eyes lingered on him, unreadable, restless. The flames painted her face in flickering light, turning her into something half wild, half sacred, and in the quiet, almost too soft for the night to carry, she whispered to herself, "You don't chain fire. You burn with it, or it burns you." The wind outside shifted, carrying dust across the barren yard. The coyotes called again, mournful and distant, as if answering her truth. The night closed in, the fire sank low, and between them, silent, but undeniable. A fragile shift began. The sun bled into the horizon, painting the sky the color of old wounds. Red dust rolled in waves across the land, stirred by hooves pounding hard and relentless. The earth trembled under the weight of men who carried death in their saddlebags. They came like shadows carved from bone and dust, a gang of bounty riders, faces hard as stone, eyes sharp as knives. Their coats were torn by the road, their rifles resting easy in calloused hands. Each man bore the look of one who had traded his soul long ago and never missed it since. At their head rode a broad-shouldered brute with a scar slashing from temple to chin, his mouth twisted into a permanent sneer. He spat tobacco into the wind as the ranch came into view, its leaning fences and weary barns standing like a man already on his knees. Silas stood in the yard, sweat still drying on his shirt, hands rough from labor. He saw them crest the hill, dark silhouettes against a bleeding sky. His stomach knotted, but he did not move. The shotgun leaned heavy in his grip, the weight both comfort and curse. Behind him, the door creaked. The girl stepped out, her figure framed in the dim light of the cabin. For the first time since he'd brought her, fire wavered. Her hands trembled, though her face stayed hard. She knew these men. The riders slowed, circling like wolves around wounded prey. Dust swirled, between them catching the dying sun. The scarred leader's voice carried low and cruel. Well, I'll be damned. Thought she'd run to ground, but here she is. Wild little filly, hiding behind a broken-down rancher. Silas tightened his jaw, shotgun steady. He was no outlaw, no hero, just a man beaten down by years of loss. But when he glanced at her, standing, stiff in the doorway, breath sharp with fear, something inside him shifted. She stays here, he said, voice flat, low. The men laughed, harsh and hollow. She don't belong to you, the leader spat. She belongs to the mark on her, and the price on her head. The girl's eyes flicked down, her body rigid, as if the words themselves were chains thrown around her throat. Silas stepped forward, dust crunching under his boot. Not tonight. A silence cut sharp between them. The leader leaned in his saddle, chewing slow, gaze crawling over Silas like a vulture on bones. Then he spat again, brown juice sinking into the dirt. You just signed your own grave, old man. We'll be back. And when we come, it won't just be for her. It'll be for fire. He wheeled his horse, the gang following. Hooves thundered. Away into dusk, leaving behind a silence broken only by the wind sighing through dead grass. That night, the fire burned low inside the cabin. Shadows stretched long, smoke curling toward the rafters. The girl sat by the flames, knees drawn close, her face half hidden in the flicker. The wild steel in her eyes was dimmed, replaced by something raw, haunted. Silas sat across from her, shotgun propped against the wall, his body heavy with exhaustion yet too tense to rest. He waited, but she was the one who broke the silence. They'll come back, she said, voice rough, low, not quite steady. They always come back. He studied her, but did not speak. Her eyes shifted to the flames, reflecting orange and gold. Slowly, her words fell like stones dropped in water, breaking the silence piece by piece. They took me from my people. My tribe was scattered, burned out, driven into the hills. I was a child. I fought them, bit, clawed, screamed. They tried to make me bow. Her jaw tightened, shoulders trembling. I wouldn't. Her hand brushed, unconsciously at her wrist where the rope burns had left their ghosts. That's why they called me wild. Men fear what they can't tame. The fire cracked, sparks leaping into the dark like fleeting stars. Silas felt the words press against him, heavy as stone. He wanted to speak, to ease the weight, but language had never been his ally. Her gaze lifted suddenly, sharp, searching. Her voice cut through the crackle of flame. Why did you buy me? Silas's breath caught. His eyes dropped to the floorboards, scarred and worn beneath his boots. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The truth was tangled, need, loneliness, something he could not name. So he said nothing. The silence that followed was louder than any answer. It wrapped the room in tension, in questions neither dared to untangle. She turned back to the fire, eyes unreadable. But for the first time, she did not spit defiance. She sat in stillness, close enough for the heat of the flames to touch them. Both. Outside, coyotes called under the bleeding moon, their voices weaving with the crackle of fire. The night stretched long, heavy with unspoken truths. Between them, fragile and dangerous as lightning, a bond began to form. Silent, undeniable, and destined to burn. Days stretched long beneath the pitiless sun, but something subtle began to shift. The ranch, once cage and gallows, became a place of testing ground. The girl did not shrink from work as many expected. She met it head-on, fierce as the wind that bent the grass flat. Silas watched from a distance as she broke a half-wild Mustang that had bloodied 3 men before her. She didn't plead, didn't flinch. She moved with the animal, hair whipping across her face, eyes burning with a fire that refused to die. When the horse finally bowed its head, sides heaving, she slid from its back, chest rising with ragged triumph. Dust coated her skin like war paint. She did not look at Silas, but he looked at her, admiration twisting like barbed wire through his chest. She hauled water from the tired well, rope biting her palms, arms trembling but never yielding. She patched the fences with hands scarred and blistered, driving nails as if she had built fences her whole life. She carried burdens most men would balk at, and she carried them in silence. Each time their paths crossed, at the trough, in the barn, by the fire, an unspoken current passed between them. A brush of fingers when tools exchanged hands, a glance too long to be ignored, a fleeting smile, gone as soon as it came, but sharp as a knife against the ribs. For Silas, every glance was sin, every stolen moment a betrayal of rules written in the dust of this land. Rules that said a woman like her was too wild to be tamed, and a man like him was too broken to deserve her. But desire has no use for rules. At night, the silence grew heavier. He lay on his cot staring at the cracked ceiling, every creak of the floor reminding him she was near. Outside, coyotes wailed, lonely as his own heart. He clenched his fists, as if tightening them could strangle the fire inside him. The girl sat by the fire many nights, her face caught between shadow and glow. She said little, but her presence filled the cabin, crowding the air until Silas felt like a drowning man. Clutching at air, the dead on the ranch pressed hard. The fences leaned more each day, the cattle grew thinner. He labored until his hands split open, but she matched him. They carried the burden together, silently, as though bound by some thread spun tighter with each sunrise. Still, he feared it. He feared what the town would say, what God would say, what the lawless land itself might bring down on them if he yielded to the pull. His heart pounded louder each time her eyes found his in the dim light. One night, the moon rose full and silver, bathing the ranch in pale light. The air was sharp, almost holy in its stillness. Silas stepped outside, the shotgun resting heavy against the doorframe, though no threat stirred. The earth smelled of dust and sage, cool under the endless sky. She was already there, standing. By the corral, her hair loose, glinting under the moon. The Mustang she'd broken tossed its head, restless in the pen, but her hand calmed it with ease. She did not look at him right away. When she finally turned, her eyes held something different. Not just fire, but truth, naked and undeniable. Her voice carried across the stillness, raw and steady. I wasn't born to bow. The words struck. Him harder than any bullet. I was born to ride beside. The silence afterward was deafening. His jaw clenched, his breath quickened, heart pounding so hard he thought she must hear it. He turned his face away, toward the horizon, toward anything but her eyes. Desire rose like wildfire, impossible to contain. But he held it. He had to. He feared what it would cost. He feared it almost as much as he craved it. She did not move closer. She did not beg. She simply stood there, bathed in silver, a figure both wild and sacred, and let the words hang between them like a vow. The hawk cried then, high and sharp, cutting the night sky in two. Its wings sliced across the moonlight, a shadow of freedom, passing overhead. Silas's fists tightened at his sides. Freedom, he thought, always came at a price, and he wasn't sure either of them could pay it. The night was too still. Even the coyotes held their tongues. Silas sat at the table, oil lamp sputtering. The girl curled silent near the dying fire. A weight pressed the air, thick, suffocating, the kind that warned of storm or death. Then it came, the distant thunder of hooves, the bounty riders. Before Silas could move, orange light flared on the horizon. Torches, a dozen of them, cutting through the black like angry stars. His heart sank. The ranch, fragile, barely holding together, was about to be tested. By fire, the gang swept in with a roar, torches swinging, laughter jagged and cruel. They flung fire at the barn, at the fences, at the brittle grass. Flames leapt skyward, greedy and fast. "Burn it down!" the scarred leader howled, sneer twisting his mouth. "Smoke her out!" the cattle screamed, hooves pounding as they scattered wild across the plains. Smoke clawed into lungs, choking, blinding. Silas grabbed his shotgun, teeth grit, but the weight of it felt heavier than ever before. This was no simple standoff. This was hell itself, spilling into his land. Then, she was there, beside him. The girl. No longer bound, no longer silent. Her eyes burned brighter than the flames rising around them. In her hands, a length of rope coiled like a snake, a glint of steel tucked at her hip. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't need it. They met the riders, head on. The clash was savage, dust and blood mixing with sparks. Silas fired. The idatu, shotgun's thunder rattling the night, dropping one man from his saddle. Another lunged at him with a blade. Silas swung the stock hard, cracking bone, but the blow sent pain screaming through his own ribs. The girl moved like lightning, rope snapping out to catch a rider's arm, yanking him clean from his horse. She brought her boot down hard, steel flashing as she cut him down before he could rise. Her breath came ragged, her hair wild in the smoke, but her eyes, unyielding, fierce, made even hardened men hesitate. The barn groaned as fire consumed. Its roof. Sparks rained, stinging skin. Horses shrieked inside, trapped. Without a thought, she darted into the inferno. Silas's chest clenched. He thought he'd lost her already, but she reappeared, coughing, dragging reins, driving the terrified animals into the open. "Go," she cried, voice hoarse, but alive. They fought side by side, back to back, two souls bound not by chains but by fire. Silas swung, struck, staggered. She struck harder. One by one, riders fell, chests torn by buckshot, skulls split, bodies trampled. Beneath their own horses fleeing the chaos, but the leader, the scarred brute, remained. He loomed in the smoke, bigger than the rest, sneer carved into his face as if he'd been born with it. His rifle cracked, and pain ripped through Silas's side. He fell to one knee, breath jagged, blood dark on his shirt. The world narrowed. Fire roared. His shotgun clattered to the dirt. The brute laughed, deep and cruel. "Told you, old man. Should have stayed out of this." He raised his weapon, ready to end it. Then, her voice cut through the chaos. Strong, fierce, unbreakable. "You don't chain fire." The brute turned, startled. Her eyes blazed through the smoke. Her voice rose, raw, triumphant. "You burn with it," she charged, wild and relentless. Rope lashed out, wrapping the brute's arm. He cursed, staggered. She pulled with everything inside her, dragging him off balance, right into Silas's reach. With a surge of final strength, Silas grabbed the fallen shotgun. The blast thundered point blank. The brute's body hit the dirt with a sickening thud, his sneer frozen forever. The night bled into silence, broken only by the hiss of dying fire. The ranch smoldered, blackened skeletons of barn and fence glowing in the ash. Smoke curled to the heavens, carrying years of sweat and struggle into the dawn. Silas stood, swaying, blood dripping from his side. The girl reached him, her hands steady as they pressed against his wound. Her touch was rough, but it held him upright when his own strength faltered. They looked out over the ruins together. The land they had fought for lay broken, but still theirs. The past had turned to ash. Yet in the ruin, something stronger had been born, something no torch could burn. The first light of dawn crept across the horizon, soft and golden. It touched their faces, dirt-streaked, bloodied, but alive. Side by side, they stood against it all, battered but unbowed. The ranch was gone, but together they remained. Morning came slow, crawling over the blackened earth with a light too soft for what the night had taken. Smoke still clung low to the ground, curling from the bones of fences and the hollowed ribs of the barn. The once living heart of the ranch lay silent, broken into ash and ruin. But silence is not always death. Sometimes it is peace. Silas sat, propped against the porch beam, shirt torn and dark with blood, eyes half closed against the weight of exhaustion. Every breath was a reminder of the fight, of the men who came to break them, and of the flames that tried to erase him from the land he'd carved with his own hands. And still he lived. Beside him she moved. The girl, no, the woman, fireborn and fierce, knelt with strips of cloth torn from her own dress, binding his wounds with hands that no longer trembled. Her touch was steady, not hesitant but sure, as though she had always belonged there, at his side. He studied her through the haze of pain, not as a purchase, not as a burden, as equal, as the fire that had kept him from collapsing into the emptiness years of loneliness had carved. Her eyes met his once, and in them he saw not chains, not defiance, but something sharper. Partnership, salvation. "You should have left me in town," he rasped, voice cracked, dry as desert bone. Her lips curved, not into a smile, but something deeper. A truth. "You would have died long before dawn." The silence after carried more weight than words could. The townsfolk came in the days that followed. They gathered at the edges of the ruin, whispers traveling faster than the wind. Where once they had sneered, too wild, too cursed, too dangerous, now they spoke with awe. Two souls had stood against a dozen. A man beaten down by life, and the girl they said could not be tamed. They spoke of the flames, of the blood spilled in the dirt, of the way she fought like a hawk loosed from its tether. And slowly, the whispers bent, no longer wild, no longer bought, but free. She walked among the ruins with her head high, ashes on her skin like war paint, eyes unbroken. He followed with a limp, but his gaze carried no shame. They did not rebuild the barn that week, nor mend the fences. They did not need to, not yet. The land was scarred, but the land would heal. So would they. One evening, as the sky bled into dusk, she stood at the corral. The mustang she had broken paced restless, as though the flames still burned in its memory. She laid a hand on its neck, and the animal stilled, bowing its head as if in recognition. Silas came to stand beside her, slow, every step heavy but determined. He watched her stroke the horse, saw how the wildness in her matched the wildness in the land itself. "You never belonged in chains," he said at last, voice low, carried by the wind. She turned her face toward him, hair catching the dying light. "And you never belonged alone." The words cut deep, not as wound, but as truth. His chest tightened. For the first time in years, perhaps in his life, he felt the weight inside him ease. When dawn broke again, softer this time, the decision was wordless. Saddles tightened, reins gathered. Two horses stood ready, restless with the urge of open land. He mounted with care, ribs still sore, but his back straightened. She swung into the saddle beside him, lithe, strong, the wind already tugging at her hair. They rode not as owner and possession, not as burden and rescuer. They rode side by side, pace matched, the distance ahead theirs alone. The land stretched, endless before them, horizon kissed by pale gold. Dust rose beneath the hooves, curling in the morning light, swallowing their trail. Behind them lay ruin, blackened and broken. But ruin is not always ending. Sometimes it is beginning. Silas glanced sideways. She rode with her chin high, scars visible, spirit untamed. He did not look away. She met his gaze once, and in that brief moment there was no defiance, no fear, no shame, only understanding. The wind carried the hawk's cry, sharp and free, slicing across the sky. Its wings cut wide arcs above them, a shadow of freedom moving where it pleased. Together, they followed. The dust swallowed their trail, as it always does in the West. But some stories do not vanish with the wind. They linger. The tale of a rancher, weary and scarred, of a girl once called too wild to belong, of chains broken, of fire endured, of a love that refused to bow. Not a conquest, not survival alone, a legacy. And in the quiet dust of morning they carried it with them, into the wide, unbroken horizon.